The alien girl ordered his execution. Now she's clutching his shirt, begging for mercy. He can feel the cold air biting at the back of his neck, the taut hush of onlookers who've gathered to witness his final moments. The twin suns of this ruined battlefield cast harsh shadows across the scorched platform. He kneels, wrist chained behind him, posture steady despite the bruises darkening his ribs. Across from him stands the alien woman who ordered his execution, tall, regal, with bioluminescent lines pulsing at her temples. She lifts an energy blade, and for a breath neither moves nor speaks. His heart thuds in a rhythm that resonates with the flicker of her glowing markings. Then, her chest rises, and her lips part in what might be a snarl or a smile. "I should carve your name into the dirt alongside the others you've buried." Her voice lashes out, reverberating through the tense silence. He doesn't answer right away, just narrows his eyes and curls his lip into a smirk. Her gaze tracks that small gesture, and the faint glow at her temples flares. In the distance, ash falls from the sky like black snow, a grim testament to the war that has raged for years between her people and his. The metal cuffs bite into his wrists, but he straightens. "Then do it," he finally says, voice low, raw from too many hours without food or water. "Or did you bring me here just to talk?" She prowls a single step closer. The onlookers remain still, uncertain whether to cheer or remain silent before their commander. Her name is Sarika Vale. He knows it because her voice has haunted the calm channels of his unit for months, issuing commands that led to the deaths of countless humans. She is rumored to be unstoppable in battle, the apex of alien warfare, rumored to be cold as the vacuum beyond their orbit. But here she is, blade in hand, and he's still breathing. "You must enjoy pain, human." Her voice resonates at a pitch that hums in his skull, more alluring than it should be. "Or you wouldn't taunt me." He tries to flex his arms, testing the constraints. "I never said I don't like pain." His eyes flick up, and he sees the flicker of confusion in her expression, a subtle sign that she's not used to a prisoner like him. "Your time's run out," she says, stepping closer, the blade's edge crackling as it nears his throat. He feels the static charge raise hairs along his neck. She lifts his chin with the scorching tip, but she's careful not to press too hard. She's playing with him, a predator toying with its catch. "I'll make it quick." "No, please. No audience to your screams." Around them, the ring of alien soldiers stiffens, weapons at the ready. One false move, and Kale Varen knows he'll be fried alive. He meets her gaze. Bioluminescent lines shimmer in a pattern he can't decipher. Danger, maybe, or intense focus. He's not sure. He goes still, every muscle tense. She's waiting for him to beg, but he only smiles. "You're making a mistake." She narrows her eyes. "I don't think so." "Really?" He arches a brow, ignoring the blade at his throat. His smirk grows insolent. "If you're so sure, finish it." Her fingers tighten on the hilt, and for a moment, the hum intensifies. The crowd leans in, hungry for the kill. But then, there's a flicker of hesitation, just a fraction of a second, when her glowing lines flare so brightly they almost dazzle him. He lunges. In a burst of raw reflex, he twists under the blade. Sparks fly. The crowd gasps as he rams his shoulder into Sarika's midsection. She staggers back, not from weakness but from surprise. He hears the crack of metal as the cuffs strain. He has no illusions about overpowering her entire contingent, but it's do or die. She recovers almost instantly, voice ringing out. "Contain him!" The soldiers move in. He lowers his shoulder into the first, slamming the guard into the dirt. Another swings an electrified baton. Kale ducks, seizing a chance to smash his cuffed wrists against the soldier's jaw. Pain jolts his battered arms, but he fights through it. Sarika watches for half a heartbeat, then snarls and leaps into the fray, every motion fluid, lethal. She's a blur of speed and lithe ferocity, but he's fueled by desperation. They collide in a violent tangle of limbs. She wrenches his arms behind him, raking her blade across his chains. There's a shower of sparks, and suddenly the metal restraints snap open. She's freed him, but not out of mercy. It's an act of cold strategy. If he fights with free hands, perhaps he'll make a mistake. She keeps the hilt of her blade pressed under his chin. He grimaces as a warm trickle of blood runs down his neck from the friction. Not bad, she purrs, eyes flicking over him. But you're still outnumbered. He sees at least a dozen alien guards forming a ring, weapons pointed. A rational mind would surrender. Instead, he backs up a step and lifts his fists, a savage grin on his face. Outnumbered, sure. But you're the only one who matters. Let's see if you can finish what you started. For a moment, she tilts her head, as though considering how best to kill him. Another flash of that pulsing light across her cheekbones. Then she lunges, hooking an arm around his neck, attempting to slam him to the ground. He twists, slipping free. Their movements crash together again, her blade grazing his side, ripping the fabric of his shirt. His smirk never wavers. The adrenaline surges through his veins, making him giddy. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shakes with a deafening explosion. Debris rains down. Sarika's guard is thrown into disarray. Kale uses the moment to roll clear. Something in the distance, an artillery strike? Another faction? He can't be sure. The entire scene dissolves into chaos. An alarm blares, some alien siren wailing through the thickening dust. A second blast rocks the platform, sending bodies sprawling. Smoke chokes the air. Kale scrambles behind a broken pillar, coughing, trying to regain his bearings. A flash of movement, Sarika steps through the swirling dust, blade still humming in her grip. She looks at him, eyes narrowed. He braces for a renewed attack, but instead of charging, she flicks a glance over her shoulder. More explosions echo on the far side of the stronghold. She curses, the word clipped and biting in her alien tongue. He doesn't wait for her invitation. He lunges at her again, grabbing her wrist. She twists out of his grip with infuriating ease, hooking a leg behind his calf to topple him. They go down in a heap of flailing limbs. The hot press of her body is against him for a moment, her breath ragged. His heart pounds. She tries to pin him, but a chunk of debris falls perilously close, forcing her to roll away. Get off! He growls, more out of reflex than any real indignation. She scrambles to her feet. Around them, her troops scatter, their disciplined ranks ruptured by the sudden assault from an unknown adversary. Ships screech overhead, unleashing more blasts. It's a full-scale surprise attack. He sees an opportunity. While her forces are distracted, maybe he can slip away, vanish into the chaos. It's not in him to retreat, but dying here proves nothing. He's about to bolt when, amid the swirling dust, he hears a strident cry from one of the alien soldiers. Commander, the southern flank is compromised. We need your orders. Sarika tenses. He almost sees her calculating. But then the glow on her skin pulses again. She aims a sharp, imperious glare at him, as if she's considering chaining him back up or just leaving him to the blasts. Survive if you can, she hisses. But if I see you again, I won't hesitate. He clenches his fists, torn between fleeing and ripping that blade from her hands. But then an energy mortar hits dangerously close, the shock wave tossing them both to the side. He lands hard, rolling over broken ground until he slams against a fallen beam. Pain explodes through his ribs. Coughing, he manages to stand. By the time he clears the tears from his eyes, she's gone, lost in the billow of dust and the screams of her own retreating troops. The platform is in ruins, cratered by fresh blasts. Bodies litter the ground. He staggers, searching for a path out of this war zone. He finds a half-collapsed walkway that leads into the twisted remains of some alien structure. Overhead, the whine of engines suggests fighter craft circling like vultures. He shakes his head, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. That woman, Sarika, spared him, albeit inadvertently. He's not sure how to make sense of it. But survival takes priority over everything else. He shoulders his way into the building, picking through broken beams and shattered glass. With each step, a flare of pain from his side reminds him that he's wounded, unarmed, and alone. If the next squad of aliens or human raiders finds him, he's as good as dead. He can't stay here. The entire area is compromised. As he reaches the far side, he spots a jagged hole in the wall big enough to crawl through. Beyond it lies a narrow alley choked with rubble. He climbs through, wincing as the rough edges of the opening cut into his arms. The alley is mercifully quiet, although echoes of distant artillery pound the air. He slumps against the remains of a metal crate. His breathing is ragged, his body screaming for rest. But he can't indulge in weakness. He knows he has to move, keep moving, find a way out before Sarika's forces reorganize or the unknown attackers sweep through. He glances at his torn shirt and the blood staining his flank. The cut is shallow, but it's enough to sap his strength if he doesn't tend to it. No med supplies, no safe zone, no plan, just the unyielding desire to stay alive. He closes his eyes for a second, letting the adrenaline settle. Her face flits through his mind, those glowing lines, that lethal grace. She had him dead to rights, a blade to his throat, and yet here he stands. Something about that moment of hesitation unsettles him more than the near-death experience. Why had she paused? Was it arrogance, or something else entirely? Shaking off the thought, he forces himself upright. This war-scorched region is a labyrinth of twisted corridors and gutted buildings. If he's going to survive, he needs to find weapons, medical supplies, transport, anything. Step by painful step, he slips deeper into the ruins, trying to stay out of sight. Every so often, the ground rumbles from another bombardment. Smoke clogs the air, making him cough, stinging his eyes. Eventually, he emerges onto a broader avenue, cratered and strewn with debris. An overturned transport vehicle catches his attention. If he can salvage anything from it, tools, a medkit, it might keep him alive a little longer. He limps over, scanning for any sign of movement. The vehicle is alien in design, sleek lines battered and scorched. The hatch is partially melted shut. Cursing under his breath, he braces a foot on the wreckage and yanks at the twisted metal until it finally gives. The interior is a gutted mess, but he spots a metallic case. With trembling fingers, he flips it open. Inside is a small injector labeled with alien symbols. He's not sure what it is, but from his time fighting these aliens, he has some guesses. A standard field med injector, perhaps. He tests it on a less important patch of skin near his arm, half expecting it to dissolve his flesh. Instead, a slight burn, followed by a cooling numbness that radiates through his body, easing the pain in his side. Lucky guess. He exhales slowly. It's not a perfect fix, but it'll keep him going until he finds real help. He rummages further, uncovering a short blade that hums with faint energy, presumably a stun or cutting tool. Good enough. He clips it to his belt. Hitching a breath, he glances around. The dawn, if it can be called that under these twin suns, casts an orange pall across the rubble. Another bombing run shrieks overhead, dropping ordnance on the far side of the city. He steels himself. The only route that looks passable is east, following the half-collapsed roadway. He sets off, refusing to limp now that the injector's working. He's still battered, but he can move with purpose. His mind flickers back to the moment Sarika pinned him. The way her body pressed against him, the flicker of light across her cheeks. He remembers how his heart hammered, but not just from fear. He tells himself it was battle adrenaline. Just that. Nothing more. The stench of burning metals and scorched flesh intensifies as he continues. Occasional bursts of gunfire echo in the distance. He passes a broken statue, perhaps some alien war hero, now decapitated, its stone face crumbled to dust. Past that, a toppled tower juts like a broken faun from the ground. Then he hears a scuffle of movement behind him. Instinct kicks in. He whirls, blade raised, heart racing. A lone alien soldier stumbles out of a collapsed entryway, wounded, unarmed. The soldier sees Kale and tries to lift trembling hands in surrender. Kale hesitates a fraction of a second. He's not in a charitable mood, but this soldier poses no threat. Before he can decide whether to help or move on, the soldier's eyes roll back, and he collapses. Kale stands there a moment, jaw clenched, then hurries forward. He checks for a pulse. Faint but present. He could leave him. That's the sensible choice. Instead, Cale glances over his shoulder, scanning the empty street. A pang of conscience surfaces. He's lost enough of himself in this war. One more death, especially a helpless one, might tip him over some moral edge. He drags the soldier into a sheltered alcove. He rifles through the soldier's pockets, finds a canister of water, some rations. He hesitates, feels a gnawing guilt, but he takes them. After all, he's the one still conscious. Apologies, he mutters to the unconscious alien. Better me than whoever else finds you. Something rattles behind him. He spins, weapon raised, only to see another figure at the mouth of the alcove. For an instant, his stomach clenches. Then he recognizes the posture, the glowing lines. Sarika stands there, a bruise darkening her temple, eyes wild with adrenaline. Her blade is drawn. He tenses for a fight. She sweeps her gaze from him to the fallen soldier, then back again. Her lip curls. You have an odd sense of mercy. He doesn't lower his weapon, but he doesn't move forward either. One less dead body to walk past tomorrow. Not that it matters in a place like this. She steps closer, not quite attacking. Something in her stance is wary, as though she's not sure whether to kill him or let him be. Her voice is tight. You're bleeding. He glances down at the crusting blood on his shirt. I noticed. She sniffs once, as if testing the air. Then she glances at the unconscious alien soldier. That one's worthless to me. He lets a bitter laugh escape. I'm not exactly your biggest fan either. Her eyes track the stun blade on his hip. You found gear. Good. Maybe you won't be so easy to kill next time. He feels anger spike. Don't you have bigger concerns, Commander? Looks like you're losing this stronghold. Her chin lifts, the bioluminescent lines throbbing with each word. I'm no longer concerned with the stronghold. The entire region is under siege by traitorous factions. I have more immediate tasks, like not dying. He could leave it at that, walk away and let the bombs finish them both. But there's something in her expression, an unspoken recognition that the war is bigger than either of them, that survival might hinge on forging an uneasy alliance. She takes another step. He raises his blade, and she stills. If you want to keep that weapon, you'll come with me. His brows shoot up. You're ordering me around? A faint, mocking smile curves her lips. I'm offering you a deal. The city is collapsing around us. You don't have transport, I do. But I need someone to watch my back until I can reconnect with my forces. He tightens his grip. Why not just kill me and take your chances? Because, she says coolly, you're a damned good fighter, and I can't afford to lose another soldier, even if he isn't one of mine. He scoffs, scanning the alley. Another rumble from overhead. The corner of a building collapses in the distance, sending a plume of dust skyward. Her luminous markings flicker, giving away her impatience. Fine, he snaps. But understand this. I won't hesitate to put you down if you double-cross me. She raises an eyebrow, voice a dark purr. You won't get the chance. They stand there a moment longer, sizing each other up like two predators forced into the same den. Then she turns and beckons him to follow. Against his better judgment, he does, ignoring the trembling soldier at his feet. He tells himself he's only prolonging the inevitable, that as soon as they reach safety, they'll tear each other apart. But in his gut, he feels a strange lurch of anticipation, a pull he can't fully explain. He blames it on the brush with death, the heady rush of survival. She glances back once, and their eyes lock, either blinking. Then she presses forward, leading him into the heart of the crumbling city. In a place like this, trust is non-existent. Yet here they are, forced to rely on each other in the middle of an enemy wasteland. He wonders if he'll regret not letting her kill him back on that execution platform. By the look in her eyes, he suspects she wonders the same. They pick their way through wreckage, the pungent smell of singed metal filling their nostrils. The sky overhead is a swirling mass of smoke and distant starships. Her presence radiates danger, but also a magnetic lure he can't shake. Maybe it's the way her body moves, graceful even in destruction, or the subtle glow that flares whenever she's agitated. He grits his teeth, telling himself it's just a leftover adrenaline. She leads him through a collapsed corridor, the ceiling half-caved. She ducks under dangling cables, glancing back to ensure he's following. The gesture is almost protective. Or maybe she's just making sure he's not about to drive a blade into her spine. They emerge into a smaller, open courtyard. A downed aircraft smolders at the center, smoke rising into the polluted sky. She points to the wreck. The pilot's dead. But if the comms are intact, I can signal a drop ship. That's our chance to get out of here. He tilts his head. Then I guess we should hurry. Unless you plan on scattering my remains before you call your rescue. Her lips twist in a humorless smile. We'll see how useful you remain. They move toward the crash site in tense silence. Each step draws them deeper into this unspoken alliance. He hates that he needs her knowledge of the city's layout, hates even more that he's almost excited by the challenge she represents. He steels himself, reminding his own battered mind that he can't afford to trust an alien commander who once put a blade to his throat. Yet as they near the burning wreck, he can't help noticing the steady rise and fall of her shoulders, the slight tremor in her breath, the way her luminous markings flare each time an explosion echoes in the distance. She's fighting her own war inside, perhaps. They're all just trying to survive. One thing is certain, she isn't the type to show mercy without reason, nor is he the type to accept it gracefully. Whatever unsteady alliance they form now is built on precarious ground. But in a city about to crumble under the weight of bombs and rebellion, precarious ground might be the only foundation they have. He grips the hilt of his blade, eyes scanning for threats. She steps into the still smoking husk of the downed craft, vanishing from view. He follows, ignoring the warning bells in his head, telling himself that if she tries anything, he'll be ready. The hiss of coolant escaping the craft's ruined engine washes over them, and he can barely see through the dense, acrid smoke. He catches a glimpse of her figure, half bent over a console that sparks erratically. He opens his mouth to speak, but a sudden whir of mechanical noise draws his attention behind him. A turret emerges from the wreckage, scanning for life signs. He lunges forward with a curse. The turret's muzzle glows, preparing to fire. Before he can strike, she's already moved, vaulting over a twisted beam to slash her blade across the turret's sensor. Sparks shower them. The turret jerks, then goes still. She lands in a crouch, the glow of her markings pulsing. He exhales, heart pounding, realizing they've narrowly avoided being mowed down. She stands, eyes flicking to him. For a moment, their gazes lock, a shared rush of adrenaline binding them. No words pass, but something intangible crackles in the air. Then she pivots and resumes her search of the console. He moves to help, shoving aside debris. He can't read the alien text scrolling across the flickering screen, but she seems to know what she's doing. She taps a few buttons, curses, taps more. Nothing but static. Another overhead explosion rattles the craft. We're running out of time, he mutters, scanning outside for any new threat. She slams her fist against the console. Useless. He glances at her. Plan B? Her lips press into a thin line. There's a supply depot a few blocks north. If it's still standing, we can access a portable comm unit. He squares his shoulders. Then let's go. They exit the craft, and she starts leading him through a maze of shattered streets and half-demolished buildings. He senses her tension rising, her shoulders coil, her gaze darts at every shadow. He doesn't trust her, but he doesn't have to trust her to use her instincts. They skirt a collapsed highway, picking their way over twisted rebar. A half-dozen times, they freeze as distant squads of rogue aliens sweep by. One group passes dangerously close, but Sarika seems to know exactly how to hide them in the rubble. Kale remains silent, forced to acknowledge her skill. Finally, they reach a battered complex that might once have been an armory. A chunk of the exterior has been ripped away, revealing rows of toppled crates. She gestures for him to follow her inside. With cautious steps, they press into the building, scanning for movement. Smoke drifts into gaping holes in the walls, and half the lights have shorted out, leaving pockets of darkness. Debris crunches underfoot. He sees scorch marks along the floor, signs of a firefight. This place was hit hard, he murmurs. She nods tersely. If the portable comms are gone, we'll have to find another route. They step over a body. Kale tries not to look too closely. The uniform suggests a mix of ranks, from her faction to the traitors. Civil war among the aliens, or so it seems. He wonders how Sarika fits into it all. She was so sure of her authority back on that execution platform. Now, with her stronghold compromised, she's grasping for whatever resources remain. At the far end of the hall, they come across a sealed door. She types in a code on the flickering panel. Nothing happens. She tries again, biting out a curse when it fails. Systems are down. We'll have to pry it open. Stand back, he says, stepping up. He looks for manual override but finds only a busted mechanism. Gritting his teeth, he wedges the energy blade into the narrow seam and activates it, hoping it can cut through. Sparks fly, and the blade groans. Slowly, inch by inch, he forces the door open while she pushes from the side. When it finally gives, the door slides open enough for them to squeeze through. Inside is a smaller chamber lined with metal lockers. Many are smashed, contents strewn about. She rushes to a locker near the back, scanning the numbers. This should be it, she mutters, prying open the battered door. Inside, they find a portable comm unit about the size of a small briefcase. She snatches it up and presses a switch. A faint glow indicates it has some power left. A flicker of triumph sparks in her eyes. We just need a secure location to broadcast from. He glances around. This building's compromised. Let's keep moving. They leave the chamber, retracing their steps. Outside, the air is thicker with smoke, the sky darker even though the suns haven't set. Something about the environment feels oppressive, as if the city itself is drowning in fear. She holds the comm unit close, tension riding her frame. He wonders who she'll call. Reinforcements from her faction? Will they kill him on sight, or try to force him into captivity again? He doesn't ask. The question simmers in his gut, fueling his own anxiety. It's not like he can waltz into an alien dropship and expect a warm welcome. But at least traveling with her might buy him a temporary reprieve. They weave through the streets, searching for a stable, defensible place to set up. In the distance, Kale hears the persistent rumble of gunfire and the roar of ships. So many factions are converging here: human rebels, alien traitors, perhaps other armies looking to exploit the chaos. They enter a half-collapsed tower that once served as an observation post. A spiral of broken stairs leads to a vantage point overlooking the city. They climb carefully, avoiding loose debris. At the top, they find a dusty control room with shattered glass windows. From here, they can see the burning skyline. She sets the comm on a makeshift table, flipping it open to reveal a small transmitter array. I'll try to raise the Loyalist command. He stands by the shattered window, scanning the ruins below. And if they don't respond? She spares him a glance. Then we improvise. She powers up the device. Static crackles, then a series of alien syllables rasp through the speaker. Her luminous markings pulse in time with each attempt to connect. He feels an odd tug in his chest as he watches her, but he shoves that feeling aside, focusing on the battered cityscape. He can hear her speaking her language in measured, urgent tones, presumably sending out a distress signal or code. The staccato replies are almost unintelligible. She curses, tries a different frequency. A moment later she stills. Kale turns to see her posture tense, eyes wide. A voice crackles through the comm, speaking in the same alien tongue. She responds, jaw tight, lines on her skin flaring. When the speaker falls silent, she slams the device shut. Well? He demands. Her throat moves as she swallows, a rare flicker of uncertainty. There's a force on the way, but it's not who I hoped. The traitorous faction has seized key communication hubs. They're blocking Loyalist reinforcements. My own people can't breach the city's perimeter in time. He gives a bitter laugh. So we're trapped. She clenches her jaw, meeting his gaze. Not if we can outmaneuver the traitors. I know a route through the lower levels. If we get past their blockade, we can reach the outskirts where a dropship can land. And you need me because... Her eyes narrow. Don't flatter yourself. If we run into human insurgents, you're my best chance at negotiation. Or at least a distraction. He snorts, turning away to hide the flicker of a grin. Sure, Commander. Let's just hope they're friendlier to me than your people are. She powers the device down fully, then tucks it under her arm. Let's move before the entire tower comes down. They slip back down the crumbling stairwell, each step jarring his sore body. As they near the base, the ground quivers again. Dust sifts from overhead. A fresh wave of bombing? He braces for impact, pressing against the wall. She stands beside him, calm clutched tight. Their eyes meet in the murk of half-light, and for a moment, the tension between them coils into something breathless. He almost says something flippant, but a thunderous crash outside snaps them both to attention. They exit the tower, scanning for the cause of the disturbance. A gaping hole now splits the street they traveled minutes ago. The city is literally tearing itself apart. She points toward a dilapidated structure with a wide, dark entrance. Down there. Old transport tunnels. If we can navigate them, we might bypass the traitor lines. He gives a curt nod, and they hurry across the uneven ground. The darkness of the tunnel envelopes them. He flicks on a small light from a panel near the entrance, but it sparks and dies. The only illumination is the faint bioluminescence across her skin. Stay close, she murmurs. The route is complex, and we don't have time to wander. He steps nearer, trying to ignore the subtle warmth of her presence. The closeness jangles his nerves, but he focuses on the objective: survive. She leads the way, the gentle glow tracing her silhouette. Every so often, she pauses, scanning the path ahead. He notices her breathing is slightly uneven, her shoulders tense. They navigate the winding corridors, stepping over twisted rails and wrecked machinery. Occasionally, the tunnel opens into a larger chamber, some subterranean cargo station. Collapsed beams block certain routes, forcing them to backtrack. At one point, she halts so abruptly that he nearly collides with her. She raises a hand, motioning for silence. He listens, heart thudding. Faint voices echo, speaking in her alien language. He can't catch the words, but by her reaction, they're not allies. They slip behind a crumbling partition, pressing close. His pulse quickens as she turns her head, the glow of her markings illuminating her fierce expression. They hear footsteps approaching. A beam of light sweeps across the tunnel. Kale clenches his jaw, gripping his stun blade. 3 traitor soldiers, wearing battered armor, appear around the bend. They're talking in hushed tones, scanning the darkness. She leans close to Kale's ear, whispering, "We can't let them alert others." He nods. Together, they spring from cover. She slashes with her blade in a quick, deadly arc, severing the rifle from one soldier's hands. Kale lunges at another, slamming the hilt of his weapon into the alien's temple. The third tries to raise an alarm, but Sarika's foot connects with his chest, smashing him into the wall. The fight is swift but brutal. One soldier tries to scramble away, but Kale intercepts, hooking an arm around his neck in a chokehold. The soldier's struggles weaken until he collapses. Sarika stands over the other 2, blade raised, breath coming fast. He eyes her, expecting a finishing blow. Instead, she flicks her gaze at him as if questioning his intent. He exhales and shakes his head, stepping back. She grimaces, then turns away, leaving the soldiers unconscious but alive. They continue deeper into the tunnel, tension thrumming like a live wire. That brief, shared choice, sparing the enemies, hangs between them, unspoken. Neither comments, but something unidentifiable settles in the space around them, an awareness that they're both starting to make decisions they wouldn't have made alone. Eventually, the tunnel leads to an exit blocked by rubble. She curses softly and tries to move the debris. He joins in, and together they clear a small path. Sweat beads on his brow, and his side throbs despite the earlier med injector. She breathes raggedly, the glow of her markings dimming with exhaustion. They push through the narrow gap and emerge into a sub-level storage yard. The roof is partially open to the sky, revealing swirling clouds of smoke tinted orange by the twin suns. They're closer to the outskirts now. The sounds of battle are fainter. He helps her scramble onto a broken ledge. She offers a hand, and for the first time, he hesitates. Accepting her help feels unnatural, but refusing might cost precious time. He grips her forearm, noticing the warmth of her skin, the slight pulse of her glowing lines. She pulls him up, and their bodies press momentarily. A spark seems to travel between them, a fleeting current that makes his heart flutter. He snatches his hand away, clearing his throat. She says nothing, but her eyes linger on him for a second longer than necessary before she gestures toward a distant structure. That's where the perimeter should be. We find a clear line for a dropship, we send a signal, and wait. He nods, forcing himself to focus on the mission, not on the electrifying tension that has begun to coil between them. They set off again, traversing the rubble-strewn pathways. Each step is laced with caution, each breath a gamble in the toxic air. Along the way, they encounter more signs of chaos: toppled watchtowers, burning vehicles, bodies of fallen alien troops. Once or twice, they spot human raiders picking through the wreckage. He urges them to detour. He's not certain the raiders would be any friendlier to him than to her. At last, they reach the perimeter. A stretch of open ground meets the city's broken outskirts. She glances around, scanning for cover. They settle near a half-demolished bunker. From there, she activates the portable comm, sets the frequency, and tries again to reach a loyalist contact. Static. Her face is tense, the lines on her cheeks flickering. He stands guard, blade in hand, scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. The wind whips dust into swirling patterns. Finally, a voice crackles through. She responds in rapid alien language, pressing the device closer to her ear. Kale can't follow, but he sees her posture stiffen. When the transmission ends, she lowers the comm. They can send a dropship in 30 minutes if we can hold this position. The traitors are patrolling, and the loyalists won't risk coming closer. That's all we have. He grimaces. 30 minutes is an eternity here. She nods. We dig in, hope we aren't found, or we fight if we are. He eyes her carefully. And once your people land, what happens to me? Her gaze doesn't waver. That depends on whether you intend to keep helping me or turn on me. But if you do keep helping, I'll make sure they don't execute you on the spot. He runs a hand through his hair, stifling a humorless laugh. Such generosity. She tilts her head, and for the first time, there's a flicker of something almost like respect in her eyes. You want honesty? I don't know what they'll do. But you'll have a better chance with me than if you vanish into the wastelands. This planet is no friend to humans or aliens alike. It's devouring everything. He can't argue with that. So they hunker down in the battered bunker, scanning the scorched terrain while the seconds tick by. No one speaks for a long stretch, but the shared awareness of each other is impossible to ignore. Every time he adjusts his position, he catches a whiff of her subtle scent, warm and intoxicating. He tells himself it's just exhaustion playing tricks on his senses. She sits with her back against a chunk of collapsed wall, calm device in her lap. Her posture is poised, but her breathing is shallow, she's taxed on edge. He leans against a broken console, trying to ignore the dull throb in his side. After several minutes, she finally breaks the silence. You never did beg for your life. He glances at her. Was I supposed to? She exhales softly, almost a laugh. Most do. He shrugs. Guess I'm not most. She looks away, and for a moment, her luminous markings pulse in a shifting pattern he can't read. Foolish or brave, I'm not sure which. Maybe both. They lapse into quiet again. Outside, the wind has died. The acrid smell of smoke still clings to everything. His eyes roam over her, noticing the small details. A bruise darkening along her collarbone, the tension in her jaw, the faint sheen of sweat that makes her markings glisten. He forces himself to think of anything else. He focuses on the time. 15 minutes left, maybe less. He should be planning an escape route in case things go wrong. But his mind keeps returning to the way she shifted her stance in the tunnel, or the fierce spark in her eyes when they fought side by side. Suddenly, she tenses, reaching for her blade. Something's out there. He darts to a gap in the bunker wall, peering out. At first, he sees nothing but rolling smoke. Then shapes materialize, half a dozen alien troops from the traitor faction, creeping across the plain, apparently searching for survivors. She ducks, gesturing for him to stay low. They watch as the patrol draws closer. They must have tracked us, she whispers. He sets his jaw. They're blocking the drop zone. Her eyes spark with anger. Then we clear them out, or we lose our chance. Without further debate, they move. She stays close to the bunker wall, while he circles around a pile of debris, hoping to flank the patrol. He counts 6 soldiers. With careful steps, he edges behind a collapsed beam. The wind shifts, carrying voices. They mention scanning for the commander, Sarika. They have orders to kill her on sight. Kale feels a cold jolt in his veins. These traitors know exactly who they're hunting. He signals to her, a subtle wave. She nods, creeping around the other side. Together, they wait until the patrol is almost in the open space between them. Then Sarika lunges first, launching into a strike with lethal grace. 2 soldiers go down in a flurry of sparks. Chaos erupts. Kale rushes forward, blade humming, taking advantage of their shock. He disarms one soldier with a swift strike, then bashes another across the face. Sarika ducks a wild shot, rolling across the ground and driving her blade through an armored chest plate. Sparks spit, the soldier collapses with a cry. Laser fire sizzles past Kale's head. He dives behind a chunk of twisted metal, breathing hard. One soldier remains, firing from behind partial cover. He can see Sarika pinned down by a hail of plasma bolts. Teeth gritted, he scans the environment. A fallen piece of rebar, about 3 feet long, juts from the rubble near his position. He grabs it. Timing the soldier's shots, he hurls it with all his strength. It sails through the air, clanging against the debris near the soldier's head, distracting him just long enough for Sarika to dart in. She thrusts her blade forward, catching him in the side. The soldier crumples with a gasp, weapon clattering to the ground. Silence falls, broken only by their ragged breaths. They stand among the bodies, hearts pounding. She meets his gaze across the short distance. A subtle nod passes between them, an acknowledgement of this precarious, shared victory. Hurrying back to the bunker, she checks the comm. We have minutes left. If the dropship picks up hostile movement, it may abort. He nods, swallowing thickly. Then we make sure it doesn't see any hostiles. They drag the bodies behind the bunker, out of immediate sight, and crouch low. The tension is electric now, their breathing harsh. Adrenaline still courses in their veins. She lifts the comm device, speaking in her language, presumably giving a clear signal. A moment later, the roar of engines splits the air. A sleek alien craft appears, gliding above the perimeter. It hovers uncertainly, scanning for threats. She steps out carefully, arms raised in a universal gesture of non-aggression. Kale stands behind her, blade sheathed. The craft descends, stirring up clouds of dust. Its side door slides open. 2 armed aliens step out. They tense upon seeing Kale, but she barks an order, gesturing for them to stand down. There's a brief standoff, the soldiers' weapons half lowered. Then they move aside, letting her board. He hesitates. She looks back at him, eyes challenging. Are you coming or not? He exhales, glancing at the battered landscape. Alone, he might survive another day, or he might die in an hour. With her, at least there's a chance. He steps forward, climbing into the dropship. The soldiers eye him with open hostility, but Sarika positions herself between him and them. The doors slide shut, sealing them inside. Engines roar, and the craft lifts off. Through a porthole, he sees the ground fall away, the devastated city shrinking beneath them. His stomach clenches with uncertainty. Sarika stands near the cockpit, exchanging terse words with the pilot. The soldiers remain close, hands on their weapons, glaring at Kale. He tries to relax, leaning against a metal bulkhead, ignoring the throbbing in his side. In a moment of respite, he closes his eyes. Once again, he pictures the moment he first saw her, blade at his throat, commanding him to beg. Now they're on the same vessel, escaping a war zone side by side. The surrealness of it all squeezes his chest. When he opens his eyes, she's standing before him, arms folded. The soldiers have moved away, presumably tending to the pilot or scanning for more threats. The craft hums, carrying them swiftly towards some unknown destination. "Where are you taking me?" he asks quietly. She studies him, luminous lines shimmering with each beat of her heart. "My faction holds territory a few 100 kilometers from here. We'll land in a safe zone. You'll be treated for your injuries." His gaze flicks to the armed aliens. "And then?" Her jaw tightens. She shifts her stance. "It depends on how you conduct yourself. Prove you're more valuable alive. If you resist or threaten my people, they'll show no mercy." He scoffs softly. "I never expected mercy. Not from you." Her lips part, but she seems unsure how to respond. The tension between them is different now, less about immediate survival, more about the uncertain next steps. She breaks eye contact first, turning to walk away. He doesn't move. The entire craft vibrates with the engine's power, and he feels fatigue drag at him. The adrenaline rush is fading, leaving him drained, battered. All he wants is to rest, but he can't afford to let down his guard. Minutes later, the dropship banks sharply, descending into a region of rocky terrain. He peers out a small window. Rugged cliffs rise like ancient sentinels, offering partial shelter from the conflict raging in the city. They land on a plateau near what appears to be a fortified outpost. The door slides open, revealing a swirl of dust. The soldiers disembark, scanning the perimeter. Sarika motions for Kale to follow. He does, stepping onto the plateau, where the wind rips at his torn shirt. Beyond the outpost's walls, harsh desert stretches under the twin suns. She speaks into a communicator, giving orders. The gates open, revealing a cluster of low, domed structures. Alien troops hurry about, some casting wary glances at Kale. He feels their suspicion like a tangible force. He bites back any defensive remarks, reminding himself that for the moment, he's at their mercy. If Sarika decides to shift from reluctant ally to executioner again, there's not much he can do. They lead him inside. The interior is cooler than the scorched plateau, with fans whirring overhead. She points to a small room. "Wait here." He crosses his arms. "While you do what?" She flicks an impatient glare. "I have responsibilities. Unless you'd prefer to wander around and get shot?" Without waiting for his reply, she strides away, leaving him flanked by two guards who station themselves outside the door. He surveys the cramped space, bare walls, a single bench, dim lighting. It could be a holding cell or just a waiting area. He sinks onto the bench, wincing at the pain in his side. The med injector's effects are fading, and he's running low on strength. Still, the day's events whirl in his mind. That final confrontation in the city, the way Sarika fought beside him, the silent currents thrumming between them whenever they locked eyes. A part of him hates her for what she's done, for the order to execute him. Another part finds himself irreversibly drawn to her, despite every reason not to be. He doesn't fully understand why. Maybe it's the raw magnetism of a worthy adversary, or the mesmerizing glow of her skin. Maybe it's just the twisted lure of danger. Time blurs. Eventually, the door slides open. A medic of her species steps in, with Sarika right behind. The medic gestures for Kale to remove his shirt. He hesitates, but one look at Sarika's cool stare tells him resistance is pointless. He peels the torn fabric away, revealing bruises and the shallow cut. The medic says something in their language, and Sarika responds with clipped efficiency. Then the medic cleans and seals the wound with a different injector than the one Kale found, this one apparently more advanced. It tingles, a deep warmth that spreads through his muscles. He grits his teeth, letting the treatment work. When it's done, The medic steps back and inclines his head to Sarika, speaking in a soft tone. Sarika nods, dismissing him. Now it's just the two of them in the small room. He can sense the change in the air. Adrenaline still simmers, but it's a different kind of tension now, quieter, more personal. She stands there, observing him with those unreadable eyes. "Thank you," he says, surprising himself. Her expression flickers with something he can't name. "It's nothing. You were injured in battle. This is standard procedure." He shrugs, rolling his shoulder. The pain is already subsiding, replaced by a strange sense of relief. "Could have just let me bleed out." "You didn't." She says nothing, stepping closer. He notices the faint bruises forming on her arms, evidence of their earlier struggles. The air between them feels charged, like the moment before a storm. "You fought well," she murmurs at last, as though trying to justify his presence. "Better than most humans I've seen." He scoffs lightly. "I've had practice." Her gaze drifts to the scarring on his torso, old marks from previous battles. "I can see that." For a breath, Heather speaks. Her bioluminescent lines glow subtly, pulsing in time with what might be her heartbeat. He tries not to stare, but it's hard. It's a mesmerizing sight, an alien beauty that simultaneously repels and intrigues him. She breaks the silence. "I've given orders that no one is to harm you unless you become a threat." He raises an eyebrow. "I appreciate the courtesy." "It's not courtesy," she says, voice edged with tension. "It's necessity. If you die here, that won't solve anything. I suspect you may still be useful." He exhales, feeling the old wariness seep in. "I'd be a fool to think otherwise." Her lips press together in a thin line, and she steps back, arms folding. "Rest if you can. Tomorrow, we'll see what role you might play in this conflict." Then she turns on her heel, sweeping out of the room. The door hisses shut behind her, leaving him alone. He sinks back onto the bench, exhaustion crashing over him like a tidal wave. Yet sleep doesn't come easily. His mind churns with too many questions, too many conflicting impulses: hatred for what her people have done, fascination for the enigma that is Sarika Vale, and a raw awareness that at any moment, everything could collapse again. Eventually, he dozes off, plagued by half-formed dreams of battles and glowing lines in the dark. He's awakened by the door sliding open. A guard steps in, gesturing curtly for him to follow. The guard leads him through dim corridors into a larger hall. There, he finds Sarika conferring with a circle of alien officers around a holographic display. They pause, eyeing him with open distrust, but she waves for them to continue. He stands at the periphery, arms crossed, listening as best he can. She occasionally translates in clipped phrases, explaining the traders' new positions, the zones of conflict. The display shows multiple fronts, each lit with ominous red indicators. He notices a cluster of markers far from the city, near a ridge line. "That's where the human raiders have been sighted," she says, nodding to him. "We don't know their numbers, but we suspect they're scavenging advanced tech." He scowls. "So what? You think I can waltz in and negotiate with them?" She arches a brow. "They're your people, after all." He laughs without humor. "They're not my people. They'll kill me as soon as they see I've been with you." One of her officers, a tall alien with stern features, hisses a comment. Sarika responds in a low tone, then turns to Kale. "He suggests we make an example of the raiders by launching an attack. But that would open another front in this war. We can't afford that." Kale shakes his head. "What's your plan, then?" She gestures at the map. "We want to intercept the raiders, recover the stolen tech before they disappear off-world or sell it to the highest bidder. But we need a small, specialized team, someone who can slip in without drawing massive retaliation." He stares at her. "You want me on that team?" She meets his gaze. "You know how humans think, how they fight. Your insight might be the difference between success and failure." He can feel the tension in the room. The alien officers glare at him, obviously not pleased with the idea. But Sarika remains unmoved. He can't help admiring her steely confidence, even if it's directed at using him as a tool. "Fine," he says at last. I'll consider it. But I have conditions. She tilts her head, the glow on her cheeks flaring. Conditions? He steps closer, ignoring the hostile stares. I'm not your prisoner. You want me to help, treat me like an equal, at least in the field. No more shackles, no more kneel and beg. Deal? A charged silence passes. She regards him, eyes narrowed. Agreed. But if you turn on us, then you can kill me. He interrupts, voice flat. That's always been on the table, Commander. A muscle in her jaw twitches, but she doesn't refute it. Instead, she looks to her officers, rattling off a series of orders. They exchange glances, then disperse, leaving the two of them alone by the holographic map. She taps a control, shifting the display to show a 3D image of the ridge where the raiders are holed up. We leave at dawn. Rest, eat, and gather what you need. I'll see you at the southern gate. He nods, suddenly aware of how hungry he is. She's about to turn away when he touches her arm, stopping her. Her gaze snaps to his, and her markings flare bright. Commander, he says softly, I don't like you. I don't like what your people did to mine. But I also don't want to see this entire planet reduced to ash. She inhales, shoulders tense. Then don't fail me. He drops his hand. She exits without another word. He stands there, heart pounding in a way that has nothing to do with fear of an alien invasion. Instead, it's a collision of conflicting loyalties and the undeniable fact that he can't tear his eyes away from her every time she's near. An uneasy alliance. A mission that might be suicide. He closes his eyes, letting out a slow breath. This day is just beginning. He finds a meal ration in the adjacent quartermaster's station, scarfing it down while ignoring the suspicious stares of the alien soldiers who pass by. Despite the tension, they let him be. Sarika's orders must be keeping them in check. His mind churns through possible scenarios for the raid. The human raiders might have old grudges against him, or might see him as an immediate threat if he shows up with aliens. But if he can slip in unnoticed, maybe he can talk. The question is whether they'll listen. He sleeps fitfully that night, sprawled on a hard cot in a small bunk. Dreams haunt him, images of blazing cities, the stench of burning flesh, and a flicker of blue-green light dancing across pale skin. When morning comes, he wakes with a headache and a cold knot of dread in his stomach. Outside, the twin suns rise on either horizon, casting the desert in a stark, golden glare. He makes his way to the southern gate. Sarika stands there with a small contingent, 3 alien soldiers, all lean and alert, armed with high-tech rifles. She looks up as he approaches, eyes unreadable. Ready? She asks. He checks the gear they've allocated, a compact plasma sidearm, a blade, and some basic supplies. As I'll ever be. She gives a curt nod. Then we move out. They set off across the rugged terrain, heading for the ridge. The desert wind whips at their clothing, carrying dust that stings the eyes. His side still aches, but it's manageable. Her soldiers move in formation, scanning the horizon. He walks near her, unable to ignore the way the sunlight catches the faint luminescence in her markings, making them shimmer. He forces himself to focus on the mission. They have a few hours' march before reaching the raiders' location. It's a tense journey, punctuated by the possibility of an ambush at every rise. But they encounter no one until they reach the outer boundary of the raiders' territory. They take cover behind a rocky outcropping, surveying the ridge through magnifiers. A cluster of makeshift shelters and a few battered vehicles are visible among the boulders. Human figures move about, armed with scavenged gear. Kale's chest tightens at the sight of them, fellow humans, but ones who abandoned any semblance of order long ago. Sarika's voice is soft. We only want the stolen tech. After we secure it, we leave. Minimize conflict if possible. He nods, silent. One of her soldiers mutters something, but she hushes him. They discuss strategy in low tones, then turn to Kale. Can you get close without drawing suspicion? She asks. He grimaces. Maybe. If they recognize me from old battles, it won't matter. But I can try to talk my way in, or at least distract them while you circle around. She holds his gaze, the same tension simmering between them. I'll give you a few minutes. If anything goes wrong, we move. Understood. He rises, stripping away the overtly alien gear, except for the blade at his waist. The plasma sidearm he tucks under his shirt, hoping to conceal it. Sarika and her soldiers slip away, skirting the perimeter, leaving him alone. His heart pounds as he approaches the ridge. There's an armed sentry perched on a rock scanning the horizon. Kale carefully steps out, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. The sentry swivels, gun leveling. Stop right there! Kale forces a grin. Easy, friend. I'm no threat. Came from the city, got separated from my unit. The sentry narrows his eyes. Which unit? Kale improvises. 4th Recon. We were pinned down, lost contact. I've been wandering in the desert for days. A voice calls from behind the sentry. Another figure steps forward, wearing patchwork armor. Who's he? Some stray from the city. The sentry mutters. The second figure eyes Kale with distrust. What's your business here? Kale keeps his voice steady. I heard rumors you have supplies, maybe a way off this rock. I'll trade what I can for safe passage. The second figure scoffs. Got nothing we need, friend. Kale glances around, noticing more raiders emerging, guns half raised. I can fight, he offers. I know a few things about alien defenses. If you're planning a move against them, I could help. They exchange doubtful looks. One of them gestures for him to follow, waving a rifle in his direction. Keep your hands where we can see them. He complies, letting them lead him deeper into their camp. He scans the area, noticing crates with alien markings, probably the stolen tech. If he can confirm which crate holds the critical device, maybe Sarika can swoop in. The tension is suffocating, each raider eyeing him like they expect betrayal. He finally spots a large metal container near a broken-down hovercraft. Alien symbols on the side match the ones he saw in the outpost data feed. That's likely their target. One man steps up, older, scarred, clearly the leader. He eyes Kale with a sneer. You look half dead. Why would we trust you? Kale forces a confident shrug. I'm alive, aren't I? Survived a war zone. Figured you could use someone like that. The leader studies him for a long, silent moment. Then his gaze drifts to Kale's belt. He frowns. That blade looks alien. Kale's pulse spikes. He tries to play it off. I scavenged it from a corpse. If it kills aliens, I don't care who made it. A murmur goes through the crowd. The leader's eyes narrow. Kale can sense the balance tipping. These men are paranoid, constantly expecting infiltration or betrayal. He wonders how long he has before Sarika and her squad make their move. Another raider steps forward, brandishing a battered scanner. He waves it over Kale, and it beeps. The display flickers with alien script. Kale's stomach sinks. Maybe it detects the comm device's signal or some leftover signature from the outpost. Boss, he's got alien tech on him, the man says, backing away. In an instant, the leader raises his rifle. Kale tenses, feeling the stairs close in. What are you really doing here? The leader growls. Kale lifts his hands, trying to maintain calm. I told you, I salvaged it. No harm in carrying it. The leader's face twists. No one just wanders out of that city alive with alien gear. You're a spy. Weapons cock, the tension a hair's breadth from exploding. Kale knows he has seconds at best. He lunges sideways, knocking one raider's rifle aside as it fires. The shot burns a line through the air. He whirls, drawing his concealed plasma sidearm. Chaos erupts. Raiders shout and dive for cover. Kale backpedals, firing a warning shot into the dirt. That's when he hears the hiss of energy blades behind the boulders. Sarika's squad emerges, picking off raiders with swift precision. A crossfire ensues, lasers scorching the air. Kale dives behind a rusted crate, shouting to Sarika. The big container by the hovercraft, it's what we need! She nods, cutting down a raider who tries to rush her. One of her soldiers sprints toward the container, rummaging for the stolen tech. Kale hurls himself into the fray, disarming a raider who blindsides the alien soldier. The fight is messy, close quarters, riddled with dust and the acrid smell of plasma burns. He feels a bullet graze his shoulder, stumbles, and then Sarika is there, blade humming as she dispatches the shooter. Their eyes meet in the midst of chaos. The tension is searing. He can taste adrenaline on his tongue, or maybe that's just the dryness in the air. They press on, systematically overwhelming the raiders. Most break and flee, scattering across the ridge. A few remain pinned by Sarika's team, quickly subdued. Finally, silence descends, broken only by the crackle of small fires and the hiss of damaged machinery. Kale stands, chest heaving, scanning for any new threats. The raider leader lies on the ground, wounded but alive, cursing under his breath. Sarika's soldier extracts a sleek alien device from the container, verifying its serial numbers. Sarika steps to Kale's side, the glow on her face bright from exertion. "We have it!" He nods, wiping sweat from his brow. "Good. Now let's get out of here before they regroup." She issues orders in her language. The soldier with the device secures it, while another covers their retreat. Kale glances at the wounded leader, who glares at him with hate-filled eyes. They have no time or reason to finish him off, so they leave him there, rummaging for a chance at survival. The group hurries away from the ridge, navigating the rocky terrain until they're far enough to call for transport. When they finally pause, Kale sinks onto a boulder, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. Sarika stands nearby, looking equally spent. He meets her gaze. "You all right?" She gives a curt nod. "Your shoulder?" He exhales sharply. "I'll live." She moves closer, ignoring the presence of her soldiers. Gently, she reaches for his arm, inspecting the wound. He flinches at the proximity. But her touch is surprisingly careful. Her luminous markings pulse in a slow rhythm, and he wonders if that's concern. "You humans are too fragile," she murmurs, almost under her breath. He tries to scoff, but the pain makes him grimace. "We manage." She signals one of her soldiers to bring a field kit. They have a quick exchange, then she lifts a small injector. He tenses, memories of his captivity flashing in his mind. But her eyes hold an unspoken reassurance. He nods once, allowing her to press the device to his arm. A sharp sting, then a cooling relief spreads across the wound. His breathing eases. "You didn't have to do that yourself," he says quietly. She meets his eyes, and for a long moment, they hold each other's gaze. "I know." No one else interrupts. Her soldiers keep a respectful distance, though their expressions betray curiosity at the sight of their commander tending to a human's injuries. Kale senses the slight shift in attitude, no longer just tolerating him, they might even see him as an asset. Still, the day isn't over. She finishes treating him, stepping back. "The dropship will pick us up soon. We'll return to the outpost, secure the stolen tech." He nods, flexing his arm. "Let's hope that's the end of it." She regards him with an enigmatic expression. "It's never that simple." He finds himself smiling grimly. "Didn't think so." They wait, tension unspoken but undeniable, both from the harrowing fight and from this intangible current that's been sparking between them since they first clashed on the execution platform. He can't deny it any longer. Every breath near her is charged, as though they stand at the edge of a precipice. Soon, the transport arrives, kicking up dust in the rocky canyon. They board, stowing the recovered device. On the ride back, one of her soldiers tries to engage Sarika in conversation, but she dismisses him with a curt shake of her head, gaze distant. Kale notices how her eyes flick to him now and then, studying him when she thinks he isn't looking. Back at the outpost, they're met with a subdued sort of victory. The stolen tech is handed over to the engineers for analysis. A brief cheer goes up from the handful of loyalists, but everyone knows the war is far from won. Kale stands off to the side, arms crossed. He notices the suspicious looks have lessened. Sarika confers with her officers, then dismisses them. She crosses the compound, stopping in front of him. "You should have someone properly treat that shoulder," she says. He lifts an eyebrow. Why, Commander, concerned for my well-being? She's about to retort, but something in his tone softens the usual barbs. Her luminous markings pulse, and she inhales. Let's call it practicality. You're no good to me half-dead. He tilts his head, a crooked smile tugging at his lips. Whatever helps you sleep at night. She narrows her eyes but doesn't argue. Instead, she nods for him to follow her into one of the medical stations. A different medic sees to his shoulder more thoroughly. As the numbness spreads, he leans back, exhaling. Sarika stands nearby, arms folded, watching. When it's done, he gets up. The medic leaves them alone in the small room. The tension returns, thick in the quiet. She's only a foot away, studying him. You risked a lot back there, she finally says, voice subdued. He shrugs. So did you. She doesn't deny it. Her gaze flicks over him, lingering on the bruises and bandages. Then she steps closer, her voice dropping lower. I gave the order for your execution. You should hate me. He meets her eyes, heart pounding. I do. Or I should. But here we are. She breathes in, and the glow across her face brightens. He's keenly aware of how close she is, of the subtle scent that's uniquely hers. Anger, adrenaline, and something like desire churn together in his gut. They stand there, either moving, either backing away. She lifts a hand slightly, almost touching his chest, then drops it. Her voice catches. I can't trust you. He nods. I can't trust you either. Their eyes lock, and in that charged silence, it's as though they're battling on another level, two forces colliding, testing if they can coexist. The tension of it coils tighter until it's almost unbearable. Then, with a low sound, she grips his shirt, yanking him closer. The motion is fierce, not gentle. He reacts instinctively, one arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her against him. Their mouths collide in a kiss that's harsh, desperate, more a struggle for dominance than a tender embrace. His fingers tangle in her hair, feeling the warmth of her skin, the electric pulse of her markings. She presses him against the wall, bodies clashing. It's not sweet, it's raw, a testament to all the anger and frustration they've shared. He feels her teeth graze his lip, and a spark of pain flares through the haze of adrenaline. He almost growls, pushing back, reversing their positions so she's the one against the wall. Their breaths mingle, each fighting for control, for the upper hand. For a moment, they break apart, panting. He can see the confusion and hunger in her eyes, mirrored by his own. She exhales shakily, her fingers still gripping his shirt as though she can't decide whether to shove him away or pull him closer. The luminous lines on her cheeks flicker erratically. He's never seen them so bright. Damn you! She whispers, voice trembling with conflicting emotions. Likewise, he rasps, leaning in again. This time the kiss is marginally softer but still edged with tension, as though they're both waiting for the other to turn this into a fatal betrayal. Their bodies press together, the warmth of shared exhaustion weaving around them. They part again, reality crashing in. She breathes heavily, stepping back as if the wall behind her is the only thing keeping her upright. He tries to gather his wits, his heart pounding so hard it hurts. Outside, a sudden commotion draws their attention. An alarm resonates through the corridor. She exhales, pressing a hand to her forehead, struggling to regain composure. Duty calls, she says, voice tight. He nods, the taste of her still on his lips. They step away from each other, each feeling the weight of what just happened. The moment to reflect is fleeting. She straightens her uniform and strides out, leaving him with that lightning-charged memory sizzling in the air. He follows her out into the courtyard, where a scout is reporting sightings of a large enemy force approaching from the west. The traitors must have tracked their location or simply decided to strike. Sarika snaps into command mode, barking orders for defenses to be readied. Kale stands by, uncertain of his place in this new crisis. Then she turns to him, eyes still glowing with residual energy. Help coordinate the perimeter. You know how human raiders think, these traitors may have their tactics now. He nods, swallowing the chaos in his chest. I'm on it. In the swirl of soldiers arming weapons and sealing gates, He pushes away the lingering taste of her kiss, focusing instead on the immediate threat. He helps direct fortifications along the outer walls, setting up vantage points that exploit the rocky terrain. It isn't long before the enemy appears on the horizon, a ragged column of vehicles and troops. The outpost braces for battle. Sarika's voice crackles over the comm, directing defenses. Kale stands atop a barricade, scanning the incoming horde through a scope. The first shots ring out, plasma bolts and ballistic rounds crisscrossing the plateau. The alien loyalists hold their ground, returning fire. A swirling cloud of dust rises from the chaos of vehicles. Kale ducks as bullets ping off the metal plating near him. He returns fire with a borrowed rifle, taking down a traitor soldier who was aiming a rocket launcher at the wall. The recoil jars his injured shoulder, pain lancing through his arm. He ignores it, adrenaline drowning out everything but survival. The conflict intensifies, smoke and dust choking the air. He spots Sarika on the far side, leading a flank maneuver with a squad of her best fighters. They engage the enemy at close range, her energy blade flashing in lethal arcs. She moves with terrifying beauty, the glow of her markings visible even in the swirling grit. He can't tear his eyes away from her. Even in the heat of battle, something about her presence draws him, an unbreakable thread tying them together. His chest tightens with a surge of protectiveness he's never felt for an alien before. Then the fight escalates further. The traitors wheel in a heavy cannon, mounting it on a truck. With a deafening blast, they fire at the wall. Part of the barricade explodes, sending shards of metal and rock flying. Kale is thrown off his feet, landing hard on his side. His ears ring, vision blurry. Through the haze, he hears shouting, sees flames licking at the edge of the outpost. The traitors are pouring in, seizing the breach. Gritting his teeth, he scrambles to his knees, grabbing a fallen rifle. Suddenly, a figure looms over him, weapon raised. He twists, discharging a burst that catches the attacker in the chest, dropping them. Panting, he pushes up, scanning desperately for Sarika. The courtyard is a whirl of chaos, loyalist soldiers and traitors locked in deadly skirmishes. He glimpses her by the main gate, battered but still fighting. She parries a thrust from a traitor's bayonet, then slashes him down. Another tries to blindside her. Kale lifts his rifle and fires, downing the would-be attacker. She looks up, meeting his gaze. Even across the smoky courtyard, he sees relief flash in her eyes. The tide of battle is uncertain. The loyalists are outnumbered, but they fight with fierce resolve. Kale weaves through the melee, lending support where he can. A traitor soldier tries to lob a grenade into a group of loyalists pinned by rubble. Kale shoots the soldier in the arm, causing him to drop the grenade prematurely, blowing himself apart. Inch by bloody inch, they push the traitors back from the walls, corralling them into the open. Sarika's leadership is ruthless, efficient. Her calls over the comm direct squads to flank the enemy. Kale can feel the momentum shift as the loyalists rally. Within an hour, the traitors' assault falters. Their vehicles are in flames, their cannon destroyed. Those who remain flee into the desert, leaving behind bodies and wreckage. The outpost stands, though scorched and battered. Exhausted, Kale staggers into the courtyard, where wounded soldiers are being treated. He spots Sarika leaning against a collapsed section of wall, breathing heavily, a gash on her arm. He moves toward her, ignoring his own aches. She meets his eyes, her chest heaving with exertion. Without a word, they look over the aftermath, a grim testament to the cost of this war. She glances at him, luminous markings flickering in a weary pattern. "Thank you," she says, voice low. He wipes sweat from his brow. "For what?" She hesitates, as though it's difficult to say. "For having my back. For fighting with me instead of against me." He exhales, stepping closer so they're nearly touching. "Didn't have much of a choice, did I?" A faint, humorless smile curves her lips. "No. But you chose to save me when you could have let me die." He recalls the shot he fired to take out her would-be attacker. He shrugs. "Force of habit." She huffs a weary laugh, then winces at the pain in her arm. He reaches out, gently inspecting the wound. She doesn't pull away. In the hush following battle, the tension between them feels heightened, a raw vulnerability laid bare by near-death experiences. Her markings glow softly, and he finds himself tracing one with his gaze, entranced. "We have to stop meeting like this," he murmurs, voice catching. She closes her eyes for a moment, exhaustion etched on her face. "Is there another way?" He doesn't answer. Gently, he tears a strip of cloth from a fallen soldier's uniform, pressing it to her arm to stanch the bleeding. She stares at him with an intensity that makes his pulse quicken. "All this fighting," she says quietly. "And for what?" He ties off the makeshift bandage. "To survive?" She holds his gaze. "I was certain I wanted you dead. Now I don't know what I want." He swallows, adrenaline and something else burning in his veins. "Likewise." She leans forward, forehead nearly touching his. Dust and the scent of ozone cling to them both. He feels the heat of her body, the hum of her breath. For a moment neither moves, both caught in the gravity of everything they've lost and everything they might still gain. Then footsteps approach, and they pull back. One of her officers arrives, reporting the casualty count. She slips back into commander mode, stiffening, issuing orders for triage. Cale steps away, letting her do her job. The rest of the day is spent in cleanup, fortifying the outpost, and caring for the wounded. Cale assists where he can, ignoring the ache in his bones. He senses the eyes of the loyalist soldiers on him, a cautious respect where once there was only hostility. That night, he finds a quieter corner of the base to rest. His mind is a churn of confusion. He thinks of the kiss they shared, raw and desperate, and the moment after, when everything seemed both inevitable and impossible. Even now, he can't shake the feeling that beneath their mutual hatred lies something more powerful. He's nearly asleep when a soft knock on the makeshift door startles him. He sits up, reaching for his blade. "Who is it?" The door slides open a crack, revealing Sarika's silhouette. She steps inside, letting it close behind her. Her posture is guarded, but there's a visible hesitation in her stance. He stands, unsure what to say. Memories of that kiss burn in his mind. She glances around the dim room, then meets his gaze. "I shouldn't be here," she says quietly. "But I can't." She breaks off, struggling for words. He crosses the small distance, ignoring the exhaustion flooding his limbs. The tension between them crackles again. "It's been a long day," he says, voice low. She nods. "I told myself I'd leave you alone. That this was just a necessary alliance. But—" He reaches up, touching her cheek lightly, tracing the edge of one glowing line. She inhales sharply, not pulling away. "I don't want to think about tomorrow," she whispers. "Then don't." Their lips meet again, but this time it's different from the frantic clash in the medical room. It's still hungry, but threaded with the vulnerability of two people who have nearly died too many times to count. Their hands roam over bruises and bandages, seeking reassurance in the closeness. They sink onto the narrow cot, breath mingling, hearts pounding. There's no delicate romance, no gentle prelude, just an urgency to feel alive in a galaxy determined to kill them. She digs her nails into his shoulders, and he groans softly, fighting not to lose himself completely. This is a moment stolen from the war, from duty, from everything that demands they remain enemies. He feels her warmth, her pulse. Despite the swirl of desire, there's an undercurrent of anger, guilt, and longing that makes every touch electric. When they finally break apart, sweat beads on their skin. She rests her forehead against his, luminous lines dimming and brightening with her rapid breath. He closes his eyes, letting the moment wash over him, a precarious calm in the midst of a storm. She slips away before dawn, leaving him with a tangled knot of emotions. He's not sure if they crossed a line that can't be uncrossed, or if this was just another battle they'll have to fight. Morning comes with new challenges. Word arrives that the traitors are regrouping, planning a larger offensive. Her officers argue that they can't hold this outpost indefinitely. Cale stands off to the side, arms folded, scanning for her in the chaos. She arrives late, looking as composed as ever, though dark circles rim her eyes. They exchange a brief look, an unspoken acknowledgement of what happened, before she addresses the command staff. They debate options. Some suggest retreat, others propose a final stand. Sarika listens, then states firmly that abandoning the outpost would cede too much territory to the traitors. But she won't throw her forces into a suicide defense either. Kale interrupts, surprising everyone. He suggests a tactical withdrawal to lure the traitors into an ambush. If done correctly, they could inflict heavy casualties on the enemy while minimizing their own losses. The officers glare at him for speaking out of turn, but Sarika raises a hand for silence. She asks for details, and he lays out a plan, using the holographic map to show how the traitors might be funneled into a choke point near the canyon. Once pinned, Loyalist artillery could devastate them. It's risky, but less suicidal than a head-on fight. To his surprise, she agrees. They set preparations in motion. Over the next 2 days, the outpost is quietly evacuated of non-essential personnel and wounded. Sarika's best soldiers remain, preparing to stage a mock defense that will entice the traitors to strike. Kale and a few specialists hide in the canyon with artillery. Throughout it all, Kale and Sarika hardly speak of the night they shared. A few glances, a brief moment of tension here or there, but the demands of war overshadow personal needs. He can't decide if he's relieved or frustrated. Maybe both. The traitors come at dusk, an overwhelming force surging across the plains. Sarika's loyalists put up a convincing fight, then begin their staged withdrawal, drawing the traitors forward. Kale waits in the canyon, hard hammering, clenching his teeth against the urge to run back and fight at her side. But he trusts her skill and leadership, trusts the plan they devised together. Sure enough, the traitors push deeper into the canyon, right into the kill zone. Sarika signals him over the calm with a grim nod. He orders the artillery to fire. A thunderous barrage rains down, tearing into the compact ranks of the traitors. Smoke and dust billow upward, screams echo. The loyalists strike again from the flanks, boxing them in. Kale emerges with a rifle, picking off stragglers. Sarika joins him in the center, her blade cutting down enemy after enemy with lethal precision. It's a rout. The traitors break, fleeing in disarray. Some are captured, others vanish into the desert. Sarika's forces hold the canyon, battered but triumphant. Kale helps secure prisoners, ignoring the knot in his gut from seeing so much bloodshed. When the smoke clears, Sarika finds him near the largest artillery piece, covered in dust and sweat, leaning against the scorched metal. She says nothing at first, just stands beside him, surveying the devastation. "They won't recover from this easily," she says quietly. He nods. "Seems we won a major battle." She looks at him, eyes flickering with that familiar glow. "Thanks to you?" A pained laugh escapes him. "Don't give me too much credit." She gestures at the smoldering battlefield. "You helped me save my people. That's not something I'll forget." He turns to her, searching her face. In the fading light, her markings shimmer softly. "What now?" Her gaze drifts to the horizon. "We consolidate. Secure the territory, drive out any remaining traitors. Maybe then this sector will know some measure of peace." He exhales, shoulders slumping. "And me?" She meets his eyes with a mix of uncertainty and warmth. "You can stay if you want." He blinks, surprised. "Really?" A faint quirk of her lips. "This galaxy is vast, and I won't pretend my people and yours will ever be allies. But here, right now, we've found a way to coexist." He studies her, remembering the countless reasons he has to hate her, the knowledge that she once ordered his death, the guilt he carries for the humans who died under her command. But he also remembers the look in her eyes when she fought to protect him, the way her breath caught when they kissed. Something softens in him. He steps closer, resting a hand on her arm. She doesn't flinch. "I won't run," he says quietly. "If I can do some good here, maybe that's enough." She allows a small smile, though it doesn't quite erase the sadness in her gaze. "Then stay. Help me rebuild, protect what's left." He nods, feeling a strange sense of relief. The war might not be over, but they've carved out a fragile corner of hope. Days pass, and with each one, the outpost transforms from a war camp to a place of cautious rebuilding. Together, they root out the last traitor cells, forging temporary ceasefires with nearby human groups. Kale finds himself working side by side with aliens he once considered monsters, building fortifications that might one day become the foundation for a more stable settlement. At night, he and Sarika share moments of raw closeness, stolen behind closed doors. Their relationship is still fraught with tension, overshadowed by the reality of their conflicting loyalties. Yet neither can deny the bond that's formed in the crucible of battle. One evening, he joins her on the ramparts, overlooking the plateau at sunset. The twin suns sink low, painting the sky in vivid reds and purples. She's silent, her face illuminated by the glow of those bioluminescent lines. He steps behind her, resting a tentative hand on her shoulder. She leans back slightly, allowing the contact. "We've come a long way," he murmurs. She exhales softly. "I ordered your execution." He smirks. "You did. And now look at us." She turns to face him, eyes filled with a mix of regret and something like affection. "I once believed humans were inferior, threats to be crushed. But you changed my mind." He brushes a thumb across her cheek, just above one glowing line. "And you changed mine. I won't pretend everything is fixed, but I'm willing to see where this goes." She places a hand over his, fingers warm against his skin. "I am too." They stand there, the desert wind rustling around them. Beyond the outpost walls, the future remains uncertain. Wars seldom end neatly, and there are bound to be new conflicts, new betrayals. But in this moment, they've forged an unbreakable connection born of shared blood and fire. Neither speaks as the suns finally dip below the horizon, leaving a sky full of stars. The silence between them is a promise, not of a fairy tale ending, but of a hard-won partnership, a bond that might survive the storms to come. He slips an arm around her waist, and she leans into him, letting the tension of the day melt away. They've reached a decisive conclusion to the battles that nearly destroyed them both. Now they stand on the precipice of something new, still dangerous, still unpredictable, but undeniably theirs. He closes his eyes, breathing in the night air, the warmth of her body against his. She rests her head on his shoulder, the faint glow of her markings steady, no longer frantic with battle. Tomorrow, they might have to fight again, or negotiate another crisis. But tonight, under the alien stars, they've found a fragile peace. They don't need declarations or vows. This moment is enough to prove that somehow, against all odds, they've chosen each other over the ruin that once defined them. And so it ends not in bloodshed, but in an embrace shared at the edge of an uncertain horizon, complete, yet teeming with the unspoken promise that whatever challenges await, they'll face them together.